The chamber hall's wooden doors swung open as a robed figure glided in. He approached the head of a large dining table. Meaty fingers gracefully swept back his hood. Golden waves made silver by the ambient moonlit interior cascaded down his back. Despite the darkness, he scanned the eyes of each person before him, scooped the golden chalice on the table, and spoke. "We gather on one of the most holy nights, Sanguinala. All throughout this galaxy-spanning Imperium, revelry abounds. But why? Why do we gather every year? What does it mean? Some will say remembrance for what our father, may we bring glory to his name, Sanguinius did for us. Others will expound further and say love. It was his love for us, and to a greater extent his father, which drove him to give his life against his traitorous dog of a brother. You would hear all these and more, but at the heart of any true answer is and will always be sacrifice. By his example, we are called on to sacrifice daily for what we love. A sacrifice for us," he lifts the chalice, gesturing to the room around him, "for our salvation from forces that would eat at us daily. And while today is the day we set aside to celebrate and mourn this unrivaled loss, we shall not forget sacrifice the rest of the year round." Overhead, crisscrossing spotlights came to life with an audible thud. People bound to their seats cringed back with squinting eyes at the birth of their exposing light. The relatively massive figure at the head of the table was also illuminated. However, where the direct hard light above accentuated each man's flaws to the point of ghoulish caricature, he stood immaculate, all but radiating in the glow. "But it seems all you gathered here have forgotten the true meaning of Sanguinala. You, members of the Administratum, who should practice sacrifice daily. You, members of the Arbites, whose enforcement of the Emperor's laws should be acted out through love for those over whom you preside. You, ecclesiarchy, most of all should remember the lessons of our father and strive to embody them and spread his wisdom," the man at the head of the table said with a sneer, his nose pointed up, staring at the space beyond. "Each and every one of you has, in some form or another, failed your divinely ordained task and sullied your position with corruption. Do not deny it. Your deeds have been monitored and recorded." The restrained assembled looked at one another nervously through squinted eyes. With a set jaw and deadly sharp eyes that cut between the beauty of his enlarged face, he continued. "As guardians of this world, and more importantly the sons of Sanguinius, it is our duty to not only ensure the order of this world, but also to guide it back as our own flock." With a thunk, the lights died, and a thud brought them back. This time, across each man sat a younger version of themselves, a son. Eyes bulged, and some began to sweat heavily, despite the room's misty draft. "And the truest form of salvation comes from those soon to be damned. You will notice that now your binds have been removed." With those words, the chafing taut ropes fell away from each man's arms, their legs still firmly shackled to their seats. In front of you on the table are 2 buttons. Each is inscribed with a cross for you and a circle for your son. Your son has a matching pair, signifying the same. The lights shall go out once more, and each of you shall choose. The light over the large man went out, and he faded away into darkness. The men sat at the table for a full minute, most just staring at their sons, some weeping, and a few begging and bargaining with their offspring. In an instant to some, and an eternity to others, the lights went out. In the darkness, trembling hands reached out and buttons were pressed. A few moments later, the lights went up. The man at the head of the table reappeared, with nearly equally large robed men behind each seat. A few moments later, the lights went up. More robed figures appeared, one for each of the seated men. The blond man at the head of the table raised up a curved dagger with a golden hilt and said, "As a reminder that no one is exempt from the price of salvation." His face straight, he dragged the blade deep through the palm of his left hand. He squeezed tight and a stream of blood poured into the cup, rivulets running down his wrist. He passed the cup clockwise. The robed figure behind the first seated man accepted it, with a bowed head. He grabbed his charge's hand to impotent protests and drew much blood, before contributing his own and passing it on. This continued until it made its way back to the head of the table.
A few golden strands fell as he swirled the Vita around.
To those of you who understood the teachings of our Father.
A fraction of the pairs of people had their chairs pulled out, with the boys led off into the darkness.
A simple sacrifice of your life for your kin is the least the Emperor has asked of you. In doing so without hesitation, and raising your children to do the same, you have earned your chance at redemption.
A moment later, the light above the large man slightly expanded to show one of the sun's faces, with another silhouetted behind him.
With every action onward, know that your progeny is with us. Go now, in the Emperor's light.
In a shocked silence, the standing men were led off into the darkness, with one or two pausing for a moment to stare in the vain attempts at one last look. While only lasting for seconds, the footsteps dragged on in the minds of those remaining. Once they finally died out, the blond man continued.
To the righteous sons of wicked seed.
A handful of the boys' chairs were pulled out.
To the few who selflessly gave all to the hesitant or selfish fathers. You are also free. Live on to die for the Emperor.
A moment later, they too were led off. A tense silence filled the room, as the large man just stared at them for a moment before he spoke.
I must say the results are always bittersweet. As disappointing as your choices may be, take heart that you shall witness the honor of these young men being inducted as aspirants of the penitent partitiate.
The first sound of the people at the table was made, but was silenced at a glance. The man calmly waved the nearest boy over, who awkwardly shuffled towards him. The boy's wide eyes, who barely reached above the table, only left the ground to make quick glances up. The man's giant physique was boldly juxtaposed to the boy. With a gentle finger, he lifted the boy's chin to make eye contact.
I am Chapter Master Haken. Watch what I do and follow along.
Haken lifted the chalice and drank deep. He slowly pulled it away from his lips, and with closed eyes, he took a slow breath through his nose. Haken passed the chalice to the youth, who nervously grasped it. Even with two hands, he barely held up what was closer to a punch bowl than a glass. Blood drained from his face, and he began to breathe erratically. As it looked like he was about to pass out, he squeezed his eyes shut and took 3 pained gulps. Shaking with frowned lips covered in blood, he slowly turned towards the next boy in line, who stepped forward. The first boy was escorted into the darkness, and the process continued until none were left. Slowly a wry smile crept upon Haken's face.
Finally, none but our honored guests.
The complexion of each bound guest matched their pallid hosts.
What kind of Sanguinala would it be without a feast?
Haken's eyes shut up to the side as he brought up a finger noting his remembrance.
Oh, I nearly forgot. We can't eat in the dark. Your eyesight is...
He took a second to think and said now in an almost whimsical tone,
less than adequate to appreciate our traditional Sanguinala decor.
With a painfully familiar thunk, the lights died, and the thud that followed finally broke the dread-imposed silence with a far stronger terror. Ceiling to floor was covered in the flayed skins of man. Their preserved faces, a still life mirroring the living screams of the present.
Oh, hush now! It's not that bad! Sure, we don't have the instinctive flair for it like the Night Lords did, but we still tried our best. Say what you will about them, but they knew how to upholster.
That moment one began to struggle, bouncing in his chair in a fruitless effort to escape. Like a stampede, the rest followed suit. In a flash of movement, Haken appeared before the first struggling man.
Shh, no, this won't do. You can't leave. You absolutely must join us for the feast.
With a slash as savage as his guttural bark of the last word, he ripped out his throat and let his blood pour into the chalice. With that kill, a feeding frenzy began. The rest of the robed marines pounced on the bound men and started eating them alive. Once the flow slowed, he stood up straight, held his chalice up, and before taking a deep drink with an exaggerated breath of delight,
a saccharine Sanguinala to all, and to all a good night.
Hi, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. I had a decent time making it. So I had a couple ideas for what to do for around a holiday video. And so I made a poll. Around 4 people voted. I appreciate each one of you who did. And 2 of the votes for a 40K holiday story. So I had this idea kicking around, and, you know, I think it turned out pretty alright, you know, kind of around what I was looking for. I'd hoped to animate the whole thing like the beginning, but then I realized I had neither the skills nor the time to do it for, you know, Christmas is just about to be here. This Christmas Eve right now. So fingers crossed for next year. I may update the script and add some animations, but we'll see. I still want to do Frothy the Squig Boy. But, you know, I have the song, but I just need to commission the actual music and everything else for it. Either way, it's been a long year, but life's short, so here's hoping next year's even longer. I've been CEO. See you on our next adventure.